I don't like the direction the most recent Yakuza games have been taking. Disregarding the name change, which I don't actually mind all that much, since it's only a change for the West, I think that the games since Yakuza 7 have been following a severe downward trend that I don't see stopping for the foreseeable future. There's a lot of reasons for that, and most of them aren't gameplay focused. I'm sure someone out there is just expecting me to be the type of guy that hates JRPGs, hearing that someone doesn't like the most recent Like a Dragon games. I don't. I'm not that kind of guy. What I do hate is their habit of writing characters that only exist to have plot relevance for one game, but still exist in the next installment because it'd be weird if they were absent. I hate when the only joke the writers seem to come up with is, wow, isn't this a wacky scenario? This is a wacky scenario, and we're aware of that, and you're also aware of that, and we're laughing with you at our own joke, because we're so good at writing it. Doubly so when said joke is just the same joke from the last game, but louder. I hate when writers make it blatantly obvious which characters are supposed to be instantly iconic. I hate when every character worth a damn has a secret tragic backstory instead of actual character traits. I hate puppeting the corpse of a once incredible character for the sake of keeping Fairweather fans who would only care about the next game if they heard that it had the sequel to Dame Dane in it, and has the Dame Dane guy in it. Not all of these problems are specific to the Ichiban saga. In fact, I'd say that most of them are a lot worse in the Judgment games. But they're a lot worse here than they were before Yakuza 6. However, one of the most apparent problems that I don't see many people talking about is the ridiculous extent to which RGG has been referencing and calling back to Yakuza 1 in Gaiden and Infinite Wealth. Mostly I think it's just disrespectful. None of the callbacks do anything substantial besides nostalgia bait all of the people who are only playing these games because they won't let Kiryu bow out of the series in a remotely dignified manner. Plus, all of this happening right after Nagoshi leaves the studio for Greater Ventures really rubs me the wrong way. It makes me worry that they were trying to do this kind of pandering before, but he wouldn't let them. If you don't know who that is, in very short, Toshihiro Nagoshi is the guy who basically invented Yakuza. Obviously, several others were involved in the production of the first game, and then even more were on the development team, but the conception of Ryuga Gotoku was pretty much him alone. He left the studio in 2021, with Lost Judgment being the last game he directly worked on. And I really hope his absence isn't something that's going to become more and more obvious as the years pass, because I'm really feeling it right now. Anyway, even without considering his absence, the references and callbacks I was talking about are doing more than disrespecting him and the series' legacy. They're also putting a massive spotlight on one of the series' most blatant problems, in such a way that magnifies it to an even bigger scale than it ever was before. What was once a slightly bothersome issue turned into a moment of severe missed potential, which then turned into some of the worst writing I've ever seen in any game that I've played. Picture this. You're playing Yakuza 0, because everyone who's watching this definitely started with 0. Chapter 2 rolls around. Tachibana sits down to dinner and gives a minutes-long, roundabout nothing burger of a reveal that he, in fact, knows Kazuma. Shocker. He name-drops him, the Sunflower Orphanage, and Nishiki, but he also drops another name. Yumi Sawamura. Ring any bells? You know, Haruka's mom. Kiryu's one love. The girl he did everything for in Yakuza 1 and then tragically lost, which literally changed the course of his life forever. And now, nearly 20 years later, they've decided that he hasn't gotten over the death of? Yeah, that Yumi. She comes up one more time in the game, to any meaningful degree, anyway. Later on, in a scene with Nishiki and Reina and Serena, they mention that she's currently in high school, and that Reina ought to hire her as a hostess since she's such a charmer. Kiryu protests, Nishiki changes his mind, Reina calls him an old man, everyone has fun. The scene ends on that note. And then Yumi disappears from the plot of Yakuza 0. This is a horrible decision on several levels. To bring her up in this game and not elaborate on anything meaningful about her is downright bizarre, especially when she's introduced as someone on the same level of importance as Kazuma and Nishiki. Numerous characters with lasting impacts on the series get dedicated sub-stories throughout the game, with some showing up multiple times to reinforce how important they are. Yumi gets no such treatment. As I said, she's barely mentioned outside of these two instances, if at all. You'd think that maybe someone would have realized that with a story that puts Kiryu and Nishiki's doomed brotherhood under a microscope, that maybe including the other super important character to both of them would have been a good idea. If not for that, then couldn't they have at least had her physically present for one scene? making her only 2 textual references in the game, one being an explanation of why she's important, and the other being an explanation of why she's not here, despite her importance, seriously downplays how important she's going to be in the very next game of the series. To those who would say that the story of Zero is already too cluttered with side characters and subplots setting up future events, I agree with you. Some culling would need to be done in order to facilitate Yumi's relevance in an ideal plot. Personally, I would just get rid of Sarah from the entire game. He's nothing but a deus ex machina that causes complications for his appearance in Kiwami. But this isn't a story surgery video. This is a me complaining about how horribly the games have mishandled a crucial part of Kiryu's character video. That said, let's move on to Kiwami. We all know how it goes. A love triangle forcefully ripped apart and left unchecked for 10 years, while one person remained the same, the other two changed on a fundamental level. One problem that's been around since the beginning of the series is how underdeveloped Yumi is. For someone around whom the entire plot revolves, she's not only off-screen for most of it, she's completely unexplored as a character and as a love interest. Her false life gets more development than the actual Yumi does. We know next to nothing about her besides her questionable taste in men when she lost her memory. She's clearly a person of strong moral convictions, but was she like that before Dojima's murder? Or was she a naive young woman destined to be used by the Yakuza because of her best friend's paths in life? We'll never know, because not only did she die on screen, which means they can't bring her back, please, they couldn't bring her back anyway without nullifying a massive emotional crutch that Gaiden and Infinite Wealth lean on. Kiwami had the perfect chance to rectify this. As a remake of the first game, it could have reframed the story to allow much more on-screen time for Yumi to both develop her character and represent how she plays into the greater narrative. But then they left the story completely unchanged because they didn't have the time or budget to reanimate the cutscenes or alter the script. But even with that, they were willing to spend the time writing and animating a new backstory for Nishiki, despite Zero pretty much perfectly showing a lot of the potential reasons for why he and Kiryu would have drifted apart with time, especially when Kiryu wasn't there to keep his ambitions in check. After all the things Kiryu put him through in Zero, it makes perfect sense why they would have drifted apart. So why waste those cutscenes on Nishiki when it would have been so much more worthwhile to show us the circumstances behind Yumi's disappearance? I want to see how Kazuma relocated her, how she met and formed a relationship with Jingu, because believe me, I really need that explained to believe it for even a second. I want to see how she managed to open a bar in the highest spot in Kamurocho, how she coped with losing Haruka, how she stole the 10 billion yen. There's an incredible story there, and instead of telling it, they told the story of how Nishiki isn't actually a bad guy. He was just told by everyone in the world that he cares about that he'll never amount to anything, so he killed someone, and now his heart is corrupted by darkness. They continued to squander those opportunities with Kiwami 2. Skipping over 6 because I feel like, for the most part, the ways that it calls back to and references 1 mean something in terms of the story, especially because that was actually supposed to be Kiryu's last game. Plus, they reference more than the first game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Kiwami 2. They could have expanded on Kiryu's internal trouble with his blossoming feelings for Kaoru, but instead of that, they made a sub-story where he voice acts in Yaoi, and another one where he sniffs panties. It's like watching the perfect fastball soar right past the batter 3 times in a row, and then they stand there waiting for the 4th one so that they can take the walk despite the fact that they've already struck out. Because they did stand there and wait for the 4th one. They waited over 5 years between Kiwami 2 and Gaiden, regardless of when Gaiden actually began development, because that is a whole can of worms I don't want to get into, to release a game that would finally do some work in developing the relationship between Kiryu and Yumi. Not what I wanted at all, especially right now when Kiryu should have been gone. But sure, let's get some introspection on how he's doing all these years later. We don't get that. We get Kiryu wallowing in a misery that hasn't existed since the 2nd game, and was pretty much gotten over by the 3rd game. And don't act like this is just a random relapse or something prompted by a revelation that his life is coming to an end. His life already came to an end. They had a whole game about that. He can't stop himself from talking about how over his life is. Within the story, he has no reason to suddenly regress as a character. As a person, which he isn't, but I'll entertain the notion, he's got no reason to suddenly be sad about Yumi again when the origin of his depression seems to mostly come from the idea that his children will grow up fine without him. Again, so much potential there. Make him selfish. Make him dependent on his children that once entirely depended on him. This plot thread has existed since Yakuza 5, with that Christmas gift substory. Capitalize on it. It's right there, sitting on the table. You already made it, so do something with it. And now we're at Infinite Wealth, where we get some of the most insulting parts of this entire situation. Best example is probably the prior mentioned Bakamitai 2, where we get a list of Kazuma's soul friends. We call this Smash Ultimate because everyone's here. Nishiki, Date, Nishiki, Majima, Saejima, Nishiki, Daigo, Nishiki, and Mame. I'm going to not lose my shit about this list making no sense at all. Mainly in why it isn't limited to dead friends to make more of an impact, or why Rikia and Akiyama aren't on it. I'm going to try very hard. Instead, let's ponder why Yumi isn't on the list. Because she was more than a friend? I would say that counts under soul friends, but sure. If you genuinely think that all he considers Nishiki and Daigo to be our friends, then sure. Even soul friends doesn't describe the brothership he shared with Nishiki, and he straight up called Daigo the son he never had in 6. But they're here, and Yumi isn't. If it's so important that she not get friend-zoned, then they should have just changed the name of the list. She needs to be somewhere that matters. Karaoke is as close to a glimpse into these characters' souls that we can get in this series. And they didn't think that maybe Kiryu should acknowledge his late, apparently still beloved, in a song? It's just stupid. Also, he barely even knows Saejima beyond seeing him sometimes in 4 and 5, and don't say that he spent years training him on how to run his family, because no he didn't. Saejima apparently went right back to jail after 4. He shouldn't be here. Why is the dog here? Like, soul friends. Are you really going to tell me that the dog is more of a friend to Kiryu than Rikia? I'm really upset that Rikia is not on the list. Anyway, Kiryu brings up Yumi later in the game as the one woman he ever loved. I remember when the trailer with this moment dropped, and people thought he was talking about Kaoru. You remember that too, I'm sure. I remember hoping this moment would fade into a flashback of their relationship officially dissolving, sometime after she moved to America in Yakuza 3. I remember thinking that these people cared about their characters. Then Gaiden came out, and I stopped hoping. Then I got Infinite Wealth, and I stopped caring. Yeah, he's talking about Yumi, and the Kaoru moment in the game doesn't even do anything to address or develop his feelings about his relationship with her. It just acknowledged that it was a thing that happened. You remember how in Max Payne 3, when Max said he, quote, hadn't forgiven himself for the Mona business? That one line is laden with more thematic importance, character development, and intrigue than anything done with Kiryu since Yakuza 6. Certainly more than's been done with his relationship with Yumi, even counting the first game. And that's really the core of it. There's no heart to their relationship. It's partially because Yumi isn't much of a character, but it's also in no small part due to how reluctant they are to have Kiryu say anything about it that goes deeper than "it happened and now I'm sad." They won't have him reminisce on any of the moments that drew them together in the first place. They won't make him upset that she died the way she did. They won't give him any lingering anger for Jingu, or Nishiki, or Sarah, or Kazuma, or any of the people directly or indirectly involved with her death. There's no complex emotions to be found. No emotions at all to be found, if I'm being honest. Just the fact, plain and simple, that she was there and they apparently loved each other. It was regrettable but acceptable in 1. It was almost developed on in 2. And it was dropped in 3. Then it was ignored in 5, which was a game about Kiryu and Haruka's relationship, so I understood. Something else was taking precedence there. But then it was ignored in 0. From there, it just kept getting worse and worse. Then Gaiden rolled around and acted like it had something to fan service, when in reality, it would have been the first game to actually develop something that it could then turn into fan service. And it didn't even do that. And now Infinite Wealth has come and gone, and we're no closer to Yumi being a character than she was on her deathbed. It's easily one of the most tragic failures of this series, and I hope to God that the new show does something interesting with her. That, or we could get a game about her. Something. Anything is infinitely better than nothing. Thank you for watching this video about something I am incredibly passionate about. If you're a previous viewer, then you already know what else I've got on this channel, but if you're new here, I've got a couple things planned out in the long term. The first one is a month of movie, the most recent episode of which you can watch here. Below that is the most recent episode of the last good Sonic game, the best Let's Play to come out in the last year, hopefully. So maybe you'll consider giving that one a watch. It's funny, I promise. Aside from those two things, I plan on making more offshoot videos like these about whatever I'm interested in at the moment. Expect games and movies, discussions, reviews, anything really. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.